Hey everyone. I thought we'd talk about someone interesting as a topic for today, whom I had honestly never heard of until perhaps a year ago, and so I suspect almost everyone else also hasn't. His name is Peter Putnam, and it's a very interesting story. Um, and we can sort of begin backwards. In 1987, this person riding his bicycle, Louisiana. He was 60 years old, and he was working as a night shift as a janitor for the Louisiana Department of Transportation. He's driving home at night. Drunk driver hits him. He dies. All right. Now, if this is all you know about someone, you will have a certain image in your mind. Maybe it's a tragic end, but whatever. Except, so it turns out after he died, he was worth about $40 million in those years, and he had willed it all to this Nature Conservancy, which I think was the largest single gift that the Nature Conservancy had ever received up till that time. So mystery number one, why is someone with in the 1980s with $40 million in riding a bicycle in a night shift, working as a night janitor, right? Unknown, but that's when the mystery deepens further, because it turns out that this person was also a physicist, and it turns out this person was not just any old physicist, but he was someone who did this when he was young, and then he went off and did other things. And I looked into it. Peter Putnam, it turns out, went to Princeton, and he studied with John Archibald Wheeler, which, if you've never heard about this, Wheeler worked with Niels Bohr. He helped develop nuclear fission. He supervised Richard Feynman. Hugh Everett coined the word black hole. And apparently Wheeler took Putnam sort of very, very seriously. And in fact, Putnam met Einstein when he was a teenager, and then he took Putnam to Copenhagen, and they and met Niels Bohr, and then of course Putnam worked with Wheeler himself too. So if you zoom out a bit, like, this is someone who's been personally talking to Einstein, Bohr, and Wheeler during this sort of extraordinary period in the history of physics. Because if you know even a little bit about sort of the history of quantum mechanics in the mid 20th century, you'll know that a lot of sort of the accepted definitions and perspectives, etc., come out from that time, right? So it sounds like, okay, promising young physicist leaves, does other stuff, except he sort of didn't really leave. He kept sort of working on his own, and he left a bunch of notes behind where he was obsessed with a bunch of questions around quantum mechanics, but also the nervous system, cognition, subjectivity, and this whole notion of the observer and the observed, which links into this this problem with the interpretation, in terms of interpreting what the standard model implies. So we have today this Copenhagen interpretation, etc. And if you know about alternative interpretations, you've probably heard about like David Bohm and Hugh Everett's multiverse ideas and stuff like that. And so it turns out Peter Putnam was also part of this, and he was also interested in, none of these seem to exactly fit, so what else might fit, etc. So if, in particular, like, if observation matters so much in our description of reality, what is this thing that is doing the observing? How does a physical nervous system acquire information about another physical system? How does subjectivity arise inside the physical world we're trying to describe? So not going to try to explain that here because I don't know that much myself. But this is just stuff that I gleaned while digging into this interesting rabbit, while going down this interesting rabbit hole. And yeah, so it turns out, like I said, he left a bunch of scribbled notes and stuff like that behind, with thousands and thousands of pages. Some physics, some math, some nervous system stuff, some language, and he didn't publish anything. I think whatever sort of friends he had at the time, especially, and Wheeler himself also asked him to do that. But apparently the way he wrote was very idiosyncratic, and you find references to, quote, Putnamese, end quote. So this sort of thing, let's call it like this underground project, sort of kept going, and that is how he ended up eventually sort of here in Louisiana, far outside this academic physical world, working as a night janitor, but continuing to write about this, which is sort of an interesting story. I mean, it would make, I think, for an interesting mini documentary at some point. But anyway, it turns out even as late as mid 1980s, John Wheeler was still trying to persuade this guy to publish, which is already several decades after he had supervised him at Princeton. And so a year later is when he got on his bicycle and died. But the story is sort of not over, because these this mass of papers that he left behind ended up in storage somewhere and were forgotten for a while, and then I think they were almost simply thrown away at some point. But then eventually someone realizes that this stuff is there, and they resurrected it. And recently, or a few years ago, there was an article somewhere. I forget where. Maybe I'll add a link about it. But there was a writer who sort of reconstructed all of this, and then and I think there were multiple storage sites, in fact. And they try to save as much of these old notes and try to save digital copies of them. So I think there are these two mysteries. There's like a personal side, which is how does someone well, just generally there's some interesting personal story here about how how he was born and what he did, what he studied, what he trained as, what he ended up doing, and so forth. But there's also a second mystery, which is like what were these ideas about? Are they relevant? Are they useful? Do they help unlock anything today? And as far as I can tell, Wheeler continued to believe that there was something there, and I think there's no true way to know. However, recently, this sort of the scanned copies of these notes have been sort of collected, and they are sort of coming out slowly. I recently, I tracked down a couple of these on Amazon. I bought them just to work through them slowly, maybe see what I can find in them. But that's just one slice of many. Presumably there will be more over time. But it's interesting because it seems to represent possibly another road through 20th century physics that disappeared with him, but is perhaps more open to exploration now, if all of these sort of notes are collected and then made available, etc. So just another tangent I thought I'd mention. And if I do end up getting time over the next year or so to read or look into some of these notes of his, I might come back and talk about this again. But yeah, that was the theme of today. If you like this sort of stuff, perhaps we'll get into more of this later. So that's all for now.